Radio for readers, Bookmark.
We all know that there's a lot of addictiveness in today's culture, but why is it not being discussed from the pulpit? That's next on Bookmark. Jay Haug has been a long-time associate of mine through our radio broadcast on politics and money. He's joined us to talk about a different topic today, how to help get the message out from the pulpit. Jay, good to see you again.
Good to see you, Mark. Great to be with you.
There are things that happened in your life that kind of prompted you to put this book together, and I wanted to know, when we talk about addiction, sexual addiction, pornography, issues that are being dealt with by sometimes psychologists, but not from the pulpit, how difficult was it for you, a former clergyman yourself, to come forth with your story?
Well, the story begins with a lot of pain in my life, and I began this very early. I had some both sexual and physical abuse between the ages of 8 and 11, discovered pornography and masturbation as a teenager, and lust was my friend. It was the thing that carried me through life, and I didn't know anything else. I didn't know how to detach from it, and therefore I carried it into marriage. And I believed when I got married that somehow my wife would be the solution to this. Turned out that was not the case. And eventually I had a couple of affairs, continued to use porn, and found myself distancing myself from my wife and other people, till eventually in 2010, through a whole series of incidences, I finally was able to let go. And God came to me and basically swung open the jail cell and said, "Do you want to stay in this jail cell with a tin cup and a cot, or would you like to be free?" And I ran out and surrendered the addiction, and I have not been back since. So it was through a lot of pain that I came to write this book. And of course, the book is part of a ministry, a new ministry we started last summer called Jacob's Well. And the listeners can both go to the website jacobswellhope.com and find out that we have a twofold approach. One is we want to help men who struggle with lust and sexual addiction to get the help they need, and we believe there is hope and freedom in this, that people can be free. And also we want to engage with Christian leaders, either pastors, preachers, leaders of Christian organizations who struggle with this either themselves or with their constituency, to learn how to speak to this, come to terms with it, and realize that the internet has changed the game, and we need to talk about the connection with the living Christ today. He is the one who bears away our sin, the one who is what our lust is really looking for, and the one who can allow us to let go and be free.
You created the book because there's a void. Why is this not being discussed from the pulpit? Is it just too invasive?
It is, and it's a very difficult thing to talk about. Number one, sex is very mysterious. I mean, we think we know all about it. We live in a sex-saturated culture, but sexuality actually is a very mysterious and profound thing, and it's hard to talk about. I mean, Paul talks about it in Ephesians chapter 5 as the mystery of the union between Christ and his church. It's very difficult to talk about. So rather than engage in something that's clergy feel that they might not be able to talk about effectively, they just stay away from it. Secondly, they may have the trouble themselves. There are a lot of pastors who struggle with this. As a matter of fact, our research tells us that more pastors struggle with sexual addiction than in the regular population. That's understandable. They're in a spiritual calling, and sometimes spirituality and sexuality, which are very close to each other in the human brain, get mixed up with each other, and we can find ourselves struggling with our own difficulties, as I did as a pastor. And thirdly, it's difficult to talk about because we're in mixed congregations sometimes. We have kids in there. We don't want to talk about it. And talking about it between men and women often undermines what we're trying to do. We're trying to build marriages, and yet if we bring it up as a subject, sometimes it creates conflicts between husbands and wives, and a lot of pastors don't want to create that conflict. They want to alleviate it instead.
Is part of this also that there's a lack of direction on how to atone from this?
There's no question about it. A lot of church teaching today, a lot of preaching, both Protestant and Catholic alike, speaks about Christ dying for our sins and bearing the penalty of our past, present, and future sins. But there's a lot of Christians who struggle because they believe that. They believe that in their hearts, as I did. But they don't understand why this continuing struggle. What does Christ have to do with the present struggle that I walk through? There's a book that we recommend on our website called Impossible Joy. I would recommend pastors and leaders to read that book because he actually has some moment-by-moment encounters with lust in this book. He was a former pastor, written by Ron Jay, and he speaks about his experiences with lust and how he sensed Christ's presence in the middle of that. How when Christ came to earth, he came into the very nature of our weakness, of our temptations, and that whatever temptation we go through, Christ says to us, I know, I've walked through that. Even though he didn't surrender to it, even though he didn't engage in the lust event, he knew the temptation to lust, and therefore he identifies with us. And so if we can understand that he both bears that lust and he bears it away from us and takes it, and he will take it in any experience that we walk through, that we'll understand what freedom begins to look like.
We've often heard the term sins of the father. Those who are involved in Jacob's well, are they worried about this being passed on to an offspring?
No question about it. Addiction appears to run in families, although not always and not always in the same way. One of the things we're working on as a kind of a low-hanging fruit for churches that may want to not get totally involved in this, but want to help their kids, is a seminar called How to Protect Your Children from Internet Porn. It's very prevalent today. The average kid is in 5th grade when he gets a handheld device. And the parents say, well, he won't look at porn, or there's a block on it. But the understanding that we have come to is that your children will find porn, or porn will find them. So the real issue is what you're going to do when that happens, not if it will happen, because they're smarter than we are often with the technology, and they know how to get around things. We've seen this again and again. They're going to discover porn. The question is, what do they do once they've discovered it? The earlier we can talk about it with them, the more we can understand their struggle, and they can understand the human struggle that is all of ours, the better we will be in talking with them.
Sometimes it appears the sin nature, if it really grabs a hold of you, is almost insurmountable to overcome. We live in Florida. People walk around in bathing suits. You've got billboards all over the place with people for chicken places and stuff. You've got pornography. You've got television with all kinds of suggested imagery. There's no escape.
There is no escape from it. And a lot of people go on anti-pornography crusades and all of that stuff. I've certainly thought about that and been involved in that. But the world isn't going to change for us. The world is going to go on its own way, and we have to be able to live in that world. And the reality is, and this is a great message that we at Jacob's Well want to bring and do bring, is that there is freedom, that you can get to a place where these things are passing you by. Martin Luther once said, you can't prevent the birds from flying over your head, but you can prevent them from building nests in your hair. And we believe that you can be free of lust one event at a time if you're willing to surrender it on a moment-by-moment basis. As you pass the billboard, as you're on the internet and you're tempted to look at that picture that leads you in the wrong direction, we can be free if we surrender it a moment at a time.
Yeah, one of the things you mentioned in this book is limiting screen time. I've never heard that discussed from the pulpit, but that's where a lot of people get into trouble, because you go in to look up something innocently, and then you sit there, and then before you know it, you're grazing.
We live in a culture of next, Mark. It's the next image. For the porn addict, it's the next image that's going to do it for us. It's the next image that's going to save us. For the shopper, it's the next pair of shoes. It's the next automobile. It's the next, for the news junkie, it's the next sports news story. The sports junkie, the next sports statistic that he's looking for on the internet. That is a kind of, it's like being at the dog track with a greyhound running around chasing a metal rabbit. If you ever caught it, he wouldn't know what to do with it. We are chasing something that if we caught it would never satisfy us. We have to understand that we are spiritual people and that we look for spiritual connection, and that can only happen in our spiritual connection with Christ and authentic connection with those who struggle as we do, and with authentic Christian fellowship and other authentic human connection. That cannot be replaced by the internet and never will be.
I'm wondering, do a lot of marriages coexist where one spouse knows it's going on but never addresses it and kind of walls himself off? The intimacy is not there now because they know something's going on. They just never talk about it with their spouse.
And that brings up a very important point, and that is what happens inside a person when they look at porn. And that is a Christian man who looks at pornography is detaching from who he really is. He's turning his back on the real relationship in his life, which is the risen Christ and his wife, and is going into a secret place in order to act out. He's acting against himself. And that secrecy and that privacy I dismissed for years. I just thought, well, this is just something, I'll just do this, and then I'll come back to my wife, I'll come back to Christ, and I'll be fine. But it affects us profoundly. I used to be shudder when my wife walked into the house because I was walled off, and I thought, what if she sees me? What if she sees the way I'm interacting or the way I'm acting and sees the lustful guy inside, or the angry, the guy with the character defects, the selfish, egotistical man? And I didn't want her to see that, so I would wall myself off. So you can see this through this whole process that intimacy becomes impossible. It diminishes. Couples begin to live with one another in name only, but they're not really experiencing the true intimacy. Now my wife and I can sit in a room, and I don't have to control the conversation. I don't have to make something happen. We're just two people sitting there freely, trying to understand each other and to be open. And that's what true life is meant to be like.
Many people who are watching and listening to this may know of it going on in their own lives or in their own families. Did you try traditional methods, counseling, things like that, and did it not work?
I have been through everything you can possibly imagine. In 1978, I confessed to my family of origin that I was addicted to pornography. You can imagine how many years ago that was. I got very little reaction from that. I went to counseling for years and years and years. Now, when I did get into recovery, finally in 1993, I did get counseling, which helped me quite a bit. But until I was willing to surrender, until I reached the end of the road, I wanted to stop but could not. I didn't embrace the real program of recovery. So that is the real issue. The issue is, what do we want? And Christ says to us, he says, do you want your lust or do you want me? And if you want your lust, I'm going to depart and stay over here. And when you're finished, then you can come back to me. But lust and Christ cannot coexist. So we've got to pick one or the other, because he's really what this is why the Bible is filled with idolatry. You ever ask yourself, why does the whole Old Testament talk about nothing but idolatry from Genesis to Malachi? It talks about it because that is the thing that we turn to. And what happens in an idolatrous situation? You go to the pagan temple, and right next door is the temple prostitute. And the whole belief in the ancient world, which is a very sex-crazed world, was that the temple and the prostitute was going to meet your need apart from God. And so God is waiting for us to say, are you finished? Are you done? Are you willing to let go? And until I answered that question, that I was really willing to let go, there was going to be no lasting recovery for me.
Jacob's Well was assembled about, the summer, 5 people
Yes.
on this board. Do they all have similar challenges in their life?
All the challenges are slightly different. We all deal with lust. That is the thing we share in common. Some of them struggle with same-sex attraction. Some struggle with picking up prostitutes or internet relationships. Most struggle with masturbation and porn. If you look more deeply in the sexual addiction recovery community, this is not on our board currently, but of course you do have people that struggle with child pornography, child molestation, and some criminal aspects. But all these things have to do with one common thing, and that is lust. A friend of mine, I'll tell you this story, a friend of mine visited a man who was actually in prison for viewing child pornography. And he was able to say to this man, he said, the only difference between you and me is that your pornography you looked at was illegal. Mine was legal. But it's the same core problem, and that's the problem of lust.
You also talk about hope. There's a big part of this that's geared toward hope. Also, just briefly, getting to people at a young age before the problem develops. If preachers will address that, and it's not just for Christians, it's for all faiths. If they'll address that when they're talking to their congregation, maybe we can stave off some of this?
There's no question about it that if the open conversation, this is a disease, this is a problem, an issue that it's like mold. It grows in the dark, damp places of isolation. And if you can talk to your kids, because the boys who are 10, 11, 12, 13, those boys are beginning to discover their awakening sexuality. And if you don't talk to them about it, they are going to find it in the schoolyard. They're going to find it in sleepovers. They're going to find it in their father's DVD porn stash. They're going to find it. They are going to find it. And the denial aspect of many parents, Christian or not, is that, oh, my kid's a good kid. He wouldn't do that. He's going to find it. And the question is, how are you going to talk to them about it? And if you do talk to them about it, at least they can be open. It doesn't necessarily mean that they won't have a problem, because, as I mentioned, unless they're willing to surrender the problem and find the solution, there is no answer. That is the ultimate answer. So let's get to hope. Where is the hope? The hope is that we can live a life free of lust. It's not a permanent, indelible solution. It's not. You don't go to a prayer service and get prayed over and never have the problem again, because all of us struggle with temptation and difficulty. That's what Jesus came to enter into when he embraced our humanity, when he cried out from the cross, when he cried in the desert in the Garden of Gethsemane about his own anguish. That was a sign that he had entered into the full humanity that we have. The solution for us is in intimacy with Christ. It's in coming to him and knowing that he lives, as the book of Hebrews tells us, lives to make intercession for us. He lives to ask us to give this over to him, to say, I will take it from you. I will bear it. I will bear it away. This is why I came, if you're willing to surrender this to me. It is not insurmountable. And what we have found is, out of our brokenness and out of our willingness to help others to recover, we have found a new meaning and a new freedom that we could otherwise never know.
I saw a startling statistic, Jay, that said over 60% of marriages may have a secret life in it somehow. Could be this. Do you agree with that?
Absolutely. I think those are the statistics. They're dramatic. Somewhere in 50 to 60% of Christian men look at internet porn on a regular basis. And that doesn't include all the secret lives of pickups, people going to websites and picking up others or picking up prostitutes. All of that is the secret life of lust. And that really is the ministry that we're involved in, is helping men to come to terms with it, to acknowledge it, and to find a new path to freedom.
And finally, I know neither you nor your board are finger-pointing, but I have to wonder, as a person who attends church occasionally as well, have pastors been driven by numbers, that a lot of their mission seems to be church planning, church building, getting congregation numbers up, and somehow they miss the mark of an issue that's right in front of them?
It's interesting you make that observation, because it is a true one, and you will upset people if you talk about this, because it's right in people's wheelhouse. We have a pastor of a big church in Jacksonville who actually preached a 1-hour sermon on lust, and he said, at the beginning of the sermon, he said, I know I'm going to lose people over this, but I'm going to talk about it anyway. And that's why that church is the fastest growing church in Jacksonville, because he's dealing with the stuff that's really going on. And I would say to any pastor, and pastors' jobs are very difficult, and I have absolute empathy with what they're trying to do. But if you really want to reach people, especially if you want to reach people that are young people, the 18 to 40 group, and you talk about this, they know about it, they know it's a problem, and they will compliment you. We had a seminar on this in our church. I do something called Christ and Culture at our church. We actually had some people who suffered from sexual addiction come and speak. And when I approached one of the young leaders of the congregation, he said, really? You're actually going to do that? Wow, that's amazing. You're actually going to address it. If you want to reach people, you got to address where they are, because it's our own brokenness that we share with people in the world. And if the people in the world who either think that Christians are too good for them, or they think they're hypocrites, or both, if we can understand that we have the same problem and it's the same answer for everybody, and we're not morally superior to them, we're going to reach many more people for Christ than we would. And I know that's what pastors are interested in.
All right, one more time. How can they go to Jacob's Well?
Visit our website. It's www.jacobswellhope.com. There are resources there. There's ways to contact us. You can contribute to us if you like. All of that's at jacobswellhope.com.
A very powerful topic and guest. The book, Speaking to the Addictive Personality in the Local Congregation, a guide for pastors and preachers. Jay Haug, our guest today on Bookmark. Jay, great seeing you again.
Thanks, Mark.
That's Bookmark for this week. If you have comments or thoughts on future authors, send an email to us at our website, bookmarc.us. That's our broadcast for today. Thanks for watching.